Welcome back to another episode of Global Women Enrichment Podcast. It's great to be back after a long hiatus. So, you know what we usually do around this time? The question is, what did GWE do last summer? So, let's see who wants to go first. Angie.
Oh, I want to go first. I'm going first. Well, this was an interesting summer because one of our sons has a very special friend, more than a friend, and she got to travel with us on our summer vacation. And so I only have boys. So having another girl on vacation was a new thing for me, and I was looking forward to it. And I had a blast with her, and so I'm just excited, and I'm hopeful that God blesses that little friendship.
Oh, okay. Dr. Brown?
You know, I'm trying very hard to remember what I did this summer. And I need to be careful to remember summer is June, July, and August, right? So, yes, we went to my nephew's wedding in St. Lucia.
Oh, nice.
That was a beautiful, beautiful experience. So we did that late July into August. And it was, wow, you should visit St. Lucia someday.
Oh, yeah.
Wow, awesome.
It's amazing.
And you can see we have a new
Special
face,
guest, yes.
which is a special guest. But I'll let her tell us about that when we turn it over to Angie, who's really going to be hosting the remainder of this session. So, Laura, what did you do last summer?
I had a blast this summer. So kicked off the summer doing Camino Santiago Compostela and started that off at the border of Portugal and Spain. And it's called Camino Portugués is the one hike that we did, or pilgrimage. And so we went up the coast and into Santiago. That was amazing. So that's how I kicked off the summer.
Okay.
And wrapped up the summer with a cruise. So we did that again. And don't worry, I didn't go to Tortola.
Okay, all right.
So it was amazing. A great summer.
Okay, awesome. And I know you're dying to know, what did Venoria do last summer? Okay, let me count. Okay, so I did a lot of traveling this past summer, actually. I had the privilege to go to New Orleans to the Essence Festival. Whoa. Yes, and that was so fun. It was an experience. And then that was in July, and August, is my birthday and anniversary month. So we did what we usually do, just go to Palm Beach Gardens, and we had a blast there. And then after that, I had to, coming back off the weekend, I had to go on a business trip to the Carolinas. So I had an eventful summer. And let me remind you, at the Essence Festival, I had a chance to catch up with my pumpkin. How can I forget my pumpkin? Okay, so that's it for me. I'm going to turn it over to Angie.
Yep.
And Angie, take it over.
So this month of September starts Hispanic Heritage Month. And we thought we would have a conversation that comes around those celebrations, those ideas, its history. And that's why we have our special guest on the podcast today, who I will introduce. But in preparation for our conversation, I realized that while I'm familiar with Hispanic Heritage Month and familiar with some Hispanic heritage, as I have married into the heritage, I wanted to know a little bit more about it. So I did some research and found that it started with 1 week of commemoration when it was first introduced by Congressman George E. Brown. This was June of 1968, well before any of us were around, right? And with the civil rights movement, the need to recognize the contributions of the Latin community gained traction in the 60s. And then the awareness of multicultural groups living in the United States was also gradually growing. And I think we've all experienced that. If we grew up here, as I did, I felt that shift of beautiful cultures coming into our space. But in Miami, I guess we don't think about it. I don't think about it so much because it just is. We are multicultural and we are incredibly Hispanic and lots of South American influences. So it really got me to stop and think for a minute about what was happening. So under President Lyndon Johnson, we started the observation of Hispanic Heritage Week, and that was in '68. And then it turned into a 30-day celebration with Ronald Reagan. So it starts on September 15th and ends on October 15th, enacted into law via approval of public law on August 17th, 1988. So 20 years it took until now we just experienced this month of Hispanic heritage. So September 15th, I found out why is that important. It's the independence anniversary for Latin American countries El Salvador, Guatemala, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, and Honduras. So just all these pieces, sometimes we think, oh, it's random. It's not so random. So anyway, we're going to talk about the contributions that Hispanics have made. In this research that I did, we're talking about the Hispanic American community, on culture, on economy, and I'm going to introduce Stephanie Silvestri, who when I was thinking about, well, who do I know that is a contributing Hispanic force? I kind of look for force in female leadership. And she came to mind. And so I called her and I said, hey, would you join us for a conversation about this? And she said, well, let me check that I can get my husband to take my daughter to dance. And then, I'll be there. So here she is. Here she is.
Thankful for him to do that.
Absolutely.
So I can be here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So introduce yourself, maybe talk a little bit about where you serve in business, but then talk about your personal experience as a Hispanic.
So my name is Stephanie Silvestri. I was raised in Miami, born and raised in Miami. My dad was actually born in Cuba, and my mom is of Puerto Rican descent, but she actually was born in Chicago and raised very American. Mm-hmm. So my parents met in Indiana, of all places. And my dad kind of said, I'm not doing this cold situation. So they chose to move to Miami and get married, raise children, etc. So I was raised in Miami my whole life. And I think when you've lived in Miami your whole life and it's all you know, you kind of just assume that this is how everybody else operates, right? The world.
Right.
And so that was my mentality. But I ended up deciding to actually go to school to become an astronaut. So I studied engineering. I went to school in Indiana, graduated as an engineer, had a series of jobs globally, a lot of different positions. And then I ended up coming back home for the same reason as my father, because I was living in Chicago and I could not do the cold weather. So came back home and I've been home for 13 years now. And I'm married, I have children as well, and we're raising our children here. And now I hold the title, I work at a wine and spirits distributor, and I'm an executive vice president for a team of 700 people nationally. And really kind of through that have become very passionate about advancing opportunities for women in traditionally male-dominated industries. So that's kind of my passion work on the side of my day job, and just helping really any underprivileged group, have a voice and a seat at the table, diversity when we're in meetings, that type of thing. So that's kind of my day-to-day life.
When we were talking ahead of this session, you mentioned something that your dad had taught you about when you entered the workforce, I guess, or when you were interviewing. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience as an Hispanic?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I was raised in this Miami bubble, and when I was in high school, my dad actually had won he was a sales guy, so he had won a trip to the Bahamas. And my mom couldn't go for some reason, so he's like, do you want to come with me to the Bahamas for 4 days? And I was like, this is amazing, yes, please. So I go with my dad, and we're at a dinner with a bunch of coworkers. And I just casual conversation at dinner, and I said something about being Cuban or being Hispanic and didn't think much of it. And when we got back to the room that night, my dad kind of sat me down and he's like, you need to be very careful about letting people know that you're Hispanic in the business world. And he's like, they will judge you, look down on you, maybe kind of carve you and look at you different or put you in this box. You may not get the same opportunities. And I was a little bit in shock because it was the first time. I was so proud of my heritage and so I grew up loving it so much, the craziness, everything about it, all the tias and tios and all of that. It was the first time that it was like something bad. And I had never had that experience before. And it was just this moment in time that I would never forget, that it was almost like you had to hide it. You couldn't be proud of it. And I really wasn't sure eventually, at that time I was 16, eventually I would enter the workforce. What would I even do with that? But I just remember that very specific moment that was a very, I don't want to say pivotal, but a milestone that I would never forget, because it made me look at being Hispanic in a completely different light that I never thought would be a detriment to my life. I always thought it was the coolest thing about my life. So it was a weird moment.
I think that feeling resonates, whether it's a background, a family background, or something about us. Everyone has had that emotional experience of like, wait a second, why is this bad?
Yeah.
So even if you're not Hispanic, even if, I'm not Hispanic, but I resonate with the feeling of, wait, I thought that was a good thing about me. Why is it a bad thing? So I'm glad that you brought that up for our listeners to hear. In your experience, however, would you say that generationally you've had a different experience than that? Have you felt it be a barrier, or have you felt it be a platform?
For me, luckily, I've felt it be a platform. I think that his comment going back generationally was how he saw people treat his mother when she first arrived to this country. She couldn't speak English very well. He would tell me stories of people on the street yelling at her and saying, go back to where you came from, because she couldn't communicate in an English accent. So he made it his life's mission to sound very American, not have an accent. And therefore at home, I didn't pick up a Hispanic accent. But for me in my generation of work, I have found it as a platform, and it's a very different time. Like when I got into the workforce, that's really the time where there was like quotas for Hispanic. Like a good friend of mine, she got into a very prestigious college. She's 1/16 Venezuelan, I think, and her mom's like, that Venezuelan really kicked in with you to getting into the school. And so it was really kind of, I feel like, this pivotal time in the late 90s, early 2000s, where because of that, you at least got in the door. But then once you get in the door, like anybody, you really have to prove yourself. So I think that it at least gave me maybe an edge of an opportunity, maybe. But like anything in life, even when you get that opportunity, if you don't prove yourself, you're not going to get the next one. So I think it's changed a lot from my dad's generation and especially my grandparents. But yeah, it's continuing to evolve now.
Right.
So, which I think that's a good thing.
You probably mentioned it, I probably missed me. Both, just your dad is Hispanic, your mom is?
My mom is Puerto Rican. She is Hispanic,
so she's
but
Hispanic
she's
as
very American. She actually, she didn't speak Spanish when my parents got married. And a very Hispanic thing to do, my abuela told her, well, if you don't learn Spanish, I guess we're not communicating. Just very kind of stubborn. So my mom ended up learning Spanish, but much more American.
Oh.
Yeah, that much more American.
I feel blessed when I talk about the Hispanic community simply because though I am not personally Hispanic, my future lineage and generations will be, because I married in. And so it's been a blessing in my life. My husband is a joy and a gift from God. He's Cuban, and my boys are therefore, hybrids of Cuban American, and forever my grandchildren, everyone will have that. So I'm connected into the community now, and I'm grateful. And we have a little bit of a surprise on our panel, because our own Laura actually, though maybe doesn't present a particular stereotypical way, is our resident Hispanic on our board here.
Yes.
Laura, you have some experience you want to share with us?
So my mom is third generation Cuban, and she actually came to the U.S. During the whole Fidel part of things, and she was, for those who know, Peter Pan. So she was on the Peter Pan flights, and so she came when she was 14 with her 12-year-old sister, and had a very impactful experience, let's say, being separated from her parents. And I think that, the other thing that she's always made it a point to share is, hey, listen, it wasn't that the doors were just completely open. In order to come, you had to have a visa.
Yeah.
So she had to wait for her visa to be able to get on a Peter Pan flight and be separated from her parents, who she didn't see again until she was already engaged to marry my dad. And luckily she had an aunt and an uncle that had been here from before, that picked her up, and her sister, and that became her parents, and in turn became my grandparents, right? So tío abuelo and tía abuela, but really a grandparent. And then my dad was born in Mexico to a second generation Cuban dad and a Spanish mom from A Coruña, Spain. And so, I say we're a bit of a Heinz 57, So my experience really was very, very Cuban focused, born and raised in Miami as well. And my mom and dad raised us to say, you are American. You were born here. You are American. This country has given us an amazing opportunity, and your heritage is Cuban. So, and my dad would throw in like, well, yeah, the Mexican. And, so my mom would be like, no, the Cuban. And it was always that funny thing. But we were raised very much Cuban. And if you talk to my kids today, who look very much like I do, their dad is, from the U.S., American, from multi-generation. Even though they have that, so, similar to you, my kids will say, I'm Cuban.
Yes.
So they really embrace their heritage. And we have, I've talked about it. Yeah. I've talked about it on the podcast before from the perspective of, we do Nochebuena and we do those sorts of traditional things tied to our culture. Yep. And, you kicked it off by the stereotypical part of it. It's very funny because no one really ever thinks that, oh, she's Hispanic or has a Cuban heritage or anything like that. As a matter of fact, traveling so much in business, there would be times that I would be on a plane and somebody next to me would start talking and asking me information on, are you heading to Miami on business or on pleasure? And I'd be like, no, Miami's home. And they'd be like, oh, how do you even deal with all those Cubans? Right? And I'd be like, well, let me tell you. And I think it's important, since we're talking about Hispanic heritage, to understand that it is a culture and a heritage, and it is not a race. Mm-hmm. And that's very important because I think the beauty of the Cuban, Cuban, and more so than the Mexican, because when you go back to Cuba, and maybe you could talk to this as well, Cuba had every race. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't that the Cuban, we like to say, oh, black and brown. And no, we were a melting pot just the same way that Miami is a melting pot. Mm-hmm. And to automatically stereotype and say that, oh, a Cuban or a Hispanic or a Latina has to look like this, I think it does a disservice to the culture and the heritage.
I wonder, I have a question for you, and I'm going to give you a little bit of background. So growing up in Miami, I could feel the shift of the culture. And my mom's best friend in her adult years was Cuban, and they had a big, glorious family that I hung out with the kids of. And actually, the grandmother of that family taught me Spanish because she didn't speak English, I didn't speak Spanish, and when you're younger, your brain absorbs a little better. And so I remember in high school being in situations where people would talk about me or talk around me, assuming I didn't understand. And then I would enter the conversation in Spanish and start talking. And I felt like, ha, 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 ha,
Yes.
Have you had that experience?
Oh my gosh. I've had that experience so often. And I will give you one. So in Miami, we have an area called Coconut Grove. Mm-hmm. And I was early 20s. And I was looking at the windows of a storefront. Mm-hmm. So I'm facing the window and I have a cup of water in my hand. I was in an area called Coco Walk, and I'm looking in because I'm seeing some clothing, and somebody comes from behind me and smacks my butt hard.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my gosh.
I was with a boyfriend at the time. He's looking with me, and I just became enraged. I was like, who has done this to me? And I turned around and I see this guy. And I know, a little bit crazy, I know. I start chasing him. I am going to, I don't know what I thought I was.
But he's a stranger.
He's a total stranger. And I start chasing him, and as I get to the sidewalk in the street, I throw my water on him, and there happens to be 3 cops. And so all of a sudden we get pulled over, like, kind of like grabbed. And the guy starts going off in Spanish saying that I've assaulted him and I'm throwing water on him and everything in Spanish. And so I just wait and I'm like, okay, here we go. And they turn to me and they're like, well, what happened? And when I explained what happened, all of a sudden the guy's eyes were like,
You explained it in Spanish
I
or in
explained
English?
everything in Spanish.
To the cops.
To the cops.
Yeah.
And the guy's eyes were like, so that became, instead of me getting pulled or cited or whatever, all of a sudden they were like, do you want to press charges? Because it was aggravated assault. So, it's a crazy situation, but one in which someone thought that they were going to get away with something because they thought, oh, I'll speak in Spanish and, she won't
understand.
Be able to
She can't
defend
defend.
herself.
Correct.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Correct.
So yeah, and I can tell you numerous ones where, just like you, people would speak in Spanish in front of me thinking I didn't understand, and they were very surprised when I opened my mouth.
Talking about that, I'm reminded of many, many moons ago. My husband is black.
Yes.
Okay? No question about it. All right? But you cannot assume who speaks Spanish from who doesn't
Nope.
speak it.
Right.
Not
And
these days.
we were in an area, we went to this place, and we had just bought a new car, and these two Spanish ladies began to engage in a conversation that they did not know we could understand. And when my husband repeated what she said, she was like, her eyes were like Sandra's, what Sandra just did.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he made it his business, that is Miami, and everywhere around him is Spanish, and he made it his business to learn Spanish.
Yeah.
I love it.
That's amazing. Good for him.
Anytime you can speak more than one language, and certainly in life and in business and in a multicultural city as we live in,
Yeah.
I think it's a win. I'm going to put you on the spot real quick and say a final word, perhaps, to our viewers. You do have a daughter.
I do have a
When
daughter,
you
yes.
think about your daughter or even your son, and you think about the next generation, what kind of impression of your heritage will you transfer? Are you transferring to them? And how would you encourage young people in their identity?
I would say that what I really want them to take away from the heritage is how much this heritage loves big. And the hugs and the affection and the love, and how mainly, it's not always, but usually the mama bears take care of the family and the matriarchs and all of that. I think that is so special and in many ways so unique to this heritage. And as I feel like we Americanize more and more throughout the generations, I hope that part of it, that they see how big we can love, which any heritage can do that, but it's just such a core part of the Hispanic heritage. I don't want that to be lost.
Right.
All the other things that, can open doors in their life, that's fine and great and, fantastic. But the love part, how they love themselves, each other, their family, others, I really hope that doesn't get diluted or lost. So we try to focus really just intentionally on that part of it throughout, raising our kids, and hopefully that's what they'll take with their families.
That's awesome. Yeah. You just made me think about when I got married. I remember my mom telling me, all right, now you're getting married. I'm going to back up and give you your space. My American mom, my mother-in-law, my Cuban mother-in-law was like, all right, what day are you coming for lunch every week?
Oh, yeah.
So I hear that.
My parents show up, they help themselves into our house.
Yes.
My husband's freaking out. I'm like, you need to meet me. They don't know better.
Yeah.
So it is very intrusive, but they
big.
show up.
It's big. It's loving big.
It's fierce. They show up. I call them. They take care of us. I've always loved how I've been loved, and I hope that that our children feel that, and then they will pass that down to more generations. So yeah, that's very special.
Good.
Very unique. Yeah.
Well, Laura, if I may give our Hispanic a final word and sign off for this edition of our podcast, would you do that?
Thank you, viewers and listeners, for joining us as we've come off of the summer break. And we look forward to having you join us as we continue our journey together. And remember to please subscribe and follow us at gwenrichment.com. Until next time, see you soon.